And the reason for that is that the courts have said, we don't want anyone to just come in with a generalized grievance. Just because you pay taxes, we all pay taxes. And if anyone could come in to just challenge this general expenditure of taxpayer funds, then we'd just have, the floodgates would open, and I actually don't think that's what would happen, but that the floodgates would open and all these taxpayers would come in, and we'd be dealing with lawsuits left and right. FLAST, as Luke articulated earlier, I won't go back over his presentation, but it's actually very narrow. And so then the question is, on the equal protection claim, are taxpayer funds being used to codify or enforce or impose animus on its citizens? I think in McDowell County we've got good facts there because there are taxpayer funds being spent in the retirement system and to bring magistrates in from Rutherford County. But think about other counties where that's not happening. What's the taxpayer expenditure there? I think that's a tough question to answer. Any other questions? I don't want to hold you guys past lunch. I know people will get hungry and angry. I get angry. I don't know about you guys, but any questions here? Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this presentation. We're happy to stick around and chat with any questions or ideas you may have. Thank you so much for your time today.
Good afternoon. Is that sound coming through okay? All right, everybody, I'm going to get started. My name is May Creadick. I live here in Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for about 15 years, and I also do some work with the Campaign for Southern Equality and helped them organize the CLE for this conference, which has been a huge honor to be involved. And it's so good to see you all here today. So we're going to be talking about stress management for lawyers. How many people here have ever had a client talk to them about some kind of traumatic experience? Looks like everybody. And how many people here have represented a client or given advice to a client that was dealing with a life or death experience? And how many people were representing a client that was dealing with something that was extremely important to them, like custody of their child? Okay, so those are stressful things. Just take a moment to think about how we've taken that onto ourselves. A lot of our clients' issues are very stressful. So the nature of our work leads us to confront issues of stress, no matter how strong we are, no matter how we were raised. And I really wish that law schools would prepare us for this. I wish that law schools would have sessions on this type of thing, mental health, substance abuse, not just ethics, because it's a really big deal. So this is the rule that really is why we're all here and having to take this course, because our competence is affected whenever we have mental health or substance abuse problems. According to the American Bar Association, because many lawyers and judges are overachievers who carry an enormous workload, the tendency to escape from daily problems through the use of drugs and alcohol is prevalent in our community. I'm going to give you some personal examples throughout this CLE, but most of this CLE is actually a compilation of stories that I've heard from lawyers like yourselves over the 15 years that I've practiced. And I'm fascinated by the topic of mental health among our profession because I had my own struggles. And so I always like to talk to other lawyers about, how do you manage your stress? What do you do when you get a case like this? Because it's really helpful. And I encourage you all to talk about that with each other. So here's the stuff that really scares the pants off of me. Lawyers are 3.6 times, more likely to suffer from depression compared to professionals from 28 other industries. Lawyers are more likely to abuse drugs or alcohol than any other profession. 18 to 20% of lawyers abuse drugs. 20% of lawyers are depressed. 40% of law students are depressed. I'm actually surprised it's not higher than that. And these come from the American Psychological Association. So personally, I was never really much of a drinker until I became a lawyer. By the time I had been practicing for 3 years, I started having wine with lunch. That was completely unheard of for me in my previous life. I was a domestic violence lawyer for a legal aid agency. And so on average, we would get about 6 new clients every week. That adds up to about 300 a year. So 300 people every year telling me about how they were being physically abused or sexually abused by their husbands or boyfriends or girlfriends or wives. And that took its toll on me. So I started to try to escape. And I never got to the point that I had to go and get substance abuse counseling, but I was certainly using substances in order to just get through my work. Why are we so stressed? Well, we have these types of cases that are extremely stressful. We work very long hours. And statistically, people who work more than 50 hours a week are 3 times more likely to abuse alcohol. And that's certainly the case with newer attorneys who are learning the ropes and have to work more in order to catch up and get up to speed with the law. There's competitive pressure. That starts in law school, where even if you all are fighting for the same cause, and in legal aid we were certainly doing that, and in the work that you all do, if you're here for this conference, LGBT in the South, we're all very passionate individuals who are fighting for causes, but there's still competition among us. We're constantly solving people's problems. And there are really high stakes. In some cases, you're fighting some big impact case that could affect thousands of people. In some cases, you're fighting for someone to get a protective order, a simple protective order that might mean that you could save her life. Or you're trying to get custody or help somebody adopt a child, such important things to individuals. And even some of the attorneys I know who are here have done death penalty cases. I can't imagine anything more stressful. So I want to tell you a personal example of a case that I had. After doing these 6 domestic violence cases per week, and hundreds per year, I was in probably my 7th year of practicing domestic violence law when I had a client who I met with in a domestic violence shelter like we did often. And she had brought her little infant daughter with her. Well, 2 weeks later, the father attacked and brutally harmed both the infant and the mother. They were able to survive, but hearing the news story basically had this awful effect on me. And I got to the point where I couldn't do the work anymore. And I call that compassion fatigue. The analogy that I can think of is if you have a cup of hot boiling coffee and you're pouring the coffee into that cup, it's like you're pouring the cases into your brain. And you've got all of these sad cases just filling up your brain, and you get to this filling point and it starts to overflow, and when it overflows you get burned. And you can stop doing this work for a little while, but the cup stays full. And if you try to add some more boiling hot water, it just overflows and you continually get burned. And so in my case, because I had not been managing my own self-care during those 7 years, I really hadn't been getting any therapy. I was letting my physical health go, having wine with lunch. I got there to a point where I couldn't do the work anymore. And so for some people, not everybody, there's a lifespan to how long you can do the work. And we see that a lot with domestic violence attorneys. In the legal aid profession, I've seen people last an average of 3 years in that work because of the volume of that work and the nature of that work. We also see it with hospice workers. Some hospice workers are only able to do that for a short period of time. And it's very difficult to leave that for attorneys who have developed a really high level of competence, and they learn a whole lot about this area of law, and they're so passionate about it, but it's killing them inside, and so they have to leave that in some cases. In my situation, it was very difficult. It was also hard to admit that I was struggling because I felt like it was a sign of weakness, and I considered myself a very strong person, and I had my identity wrapped up into this work like a lot of lawyers do. But ultimately, I did decide to go into a different area of practice, and luckily for me, I was able to stay in the same firm and do different work. So why don't we get help sooner? Why wait 7 years or even 7 days, if you're struggling with the types of things that we struggle with. As lawyers, a lot of us are controlling. I'll admit to that. I think I can control my own mental health. I think I don't need any help. And we're perfectionists. And so, to admit that we're having a struggle would be some sign of weakness. This gets in the way of resolving our own issues. 70% of lawyers believe that we can handle our own addiction problems. 40% fear that getting help would negatively affect their reputation. Reputation is everything in this profession. You get referrals because you have a good reputation. You get respect in the courtroom because of your reputation. Imagine how it feels to have everybody suddenly hear that you had to go into alcohol treatment, or that you're having some kind of mental health problem and you had to seek help for that. But there is no shame in getting that type of help. Not getting help can lead to client neglect. It can lead to malpractice. It can lead to your own family problems, increased mental and physical health problems, and even suicide. Raise your hand if you know an attorney who's taken their own life. Okay, wow, that's a lot. There's about, I'd say 50% of the room. So in my example, after that experience with the woman and her baby who had been brutally attacked by their abuser, I finally went and got some therapy. And I was lucky enough to be in a law firm that actually provided reimbursement for that. At the time, we didn't have the Bar Cares program, where you can get treatment for free. And so my boss was paying the co-pays for me to get some help, as well as the other attorneys that were dealing with these cases. And so the symptoms that I had been experiencing was I had trouble sleeping. I would wake up in the middle of the night and thought things were crawling on me. I had invasive thoughts. I was constantly being bombarded, what I call them daymares. I would imagine horrible things happening to the people I care about, or I would just relive the things that my clients had told me about that were very traumatic to them. I had very low energy. Like, we'd finally get to the weekend and we're like, it's finally the weekend, but I just couldn't move. I was so tired and exhausted mentally. My therapist diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I thought, wow, isn't that stuff like veterans have? How could I have that? I've never been in a war. I've never been a victim of domestic violence. How could I have that? I grew up in a loving home. I was diagnosed with secondary trauma and also with an anxiety disorder. So, I think that dealing with those issues was certainly way more important than maintaining a reputation or admitting a sign of weakness. And that's really the point of all of this. So, this is where we can get help. Every state has a lawyer's assistance program. In Buncombe County, we have the Bar Cares program, which provides 3 free counseling sessions per year. Usually what happens with the attorneys I know who have done Bar Cares is after 3 sessions, which are usually the 3 most difficult sessions of therapy that they'll ever have, they realize, I have to do this. This is really helping me. And so they continue after that, and hopefully they have insurance that will cover that. So this is the web address for the Bar Cares program, www.barcares.org. And the number, 1-800-640-0735. It's completely confidential. So don't become a statistic. Here's a little comic relief now. This is one of my favorite little attorney cartoons where the judge is looking at the cross-examining attorney and saying, in the future, please say I object rather than that's total bullshit. So how many of us have seen lawyers lose their shit in court? I think that is a sign of stress. And that's one of the reasons that I had a lot of stress was dealing with other lawyers. I'd say that was like 1/3 of my stress was jerks in the courtroom, people who are sexist, racist, homophobic, judges too. And it was very difficult to work in smaller counties in the mountains of North Carolina, in the Bible Belt, you know, confronting those problems with other lawyers. I did develop some empathy for the people like this, because you realize what they're dealing with, the same things you are. And sometimes stress manifests itself with anger and disruptive behaviors. So recognize good stress versus bad stress. Good stress could be, you know, I'm getting kind of amped up about this big trial, and it helps you focus. It helps you work, because typically we procrastinate and we wait and stay up a whole lot, typing a really awesome brief or preparing our closing and opening arguments. And so that can be good stress. That can really help us get through a difficult amount of work. But getting pulled into your client's life problems is bad stress. It can cause you to become withdrawn, irritable, unfocused, and depressed. Recognize how you react to stress. One of the things that I noticed in therapy was where I was holding it. My therapist would say, you know, tell me about a stressful event. And as soon as I finished telling her, she'd be like, okay, what are you doing with your body? Tell me, where is it right now? And I'd be like, I'm really clenching my teeth. My shoulders are all cinched up. And so she would teach me just to relax, like let that jaw drop and let those shoulders drop, and take deep breaths. And that can really make a difference. If you're sitting in your office and you just got off the phone with a opposing counsel or with opposing party, or something just came up that was very difficult, you know, notice in your body physically what you're doing, and try to relax those areas and try to do something to improve your physical health. Also, don't ignore those symptoms. Don't just say, oh, that was so stressful, and then go have a glass of wine with lunch. You know, don't just be like, oh, I gotta go surf the internet now, and try to like calm down from that. Don't choose drugs. Don't choose gambling. Don't choose all of those other addictive things as a way of responding to that stress. So in talking to my colleagues, and also in preparation for this, I called some of the attorneys I know who seem the most serene. And I said, what do you do? How do you do it? And they had some really good advice, and that's included in this training today. So stress management. Some people go to therapy. Some of us unplug. And I know that's really hard, especially for you folks who are in private practice and you don't have backup. That can be very difficult. But just keep in mind that if you don't take an opportunity to unplug from your clients, you're not going to be the best attorney that they need you to be. And so you need to have boundaries with those clients and say, you know, I'm not available on weekends, or this weekend I'm not going to be available. I need to unplug. Avoid stressful people. I don't know why, but some of us seek them out. In the off time, when you're not on and practicing in front of difficult people, try to be around people who are calming. Physical activity. I mean, I can't say it enough. Getting those natural endorphins flowing can really help you feel better. And that can be anything from just walking in the beautiful mountains outside, yoga, bicycling, running. Gardening is my favorite. Meditate, breathe, and tidy. The tidying is one of the things I learned from an attorney I used to work with, who every time I'd walk into her office, it would look like, you know, she didn't work there. And everything was so organized and so nice, and that can actually really bring a lot of calmness to your life if you can take a little bit of time at the end of every day and organize your office. That can certainly help. And we know that our boss never did that, though. Nutrition. You know, there are certain things that can actually reduce your stress that you can eat. You can drink lots of water, fruits and vegetables, grains, sleep. You know, even if you might need a little bit of a sleep aid, it is so important to rest your brain after a long day. Spending time with people, especially for those of us who are parents, it gives me such joy to spend time with my son. And to really make that a big part of your day is important. And let me also say, though, that even if you can't make it to every basketball game or soccer game that they're playing, that doesn't mean that your priorities are off. You do what you can as a parent to be there when you can. And so it's just a balancing act that we have to do. Patting a pet. I mean, there's so many times that having a cat or a dog to stroke at the end of a day, it can really help you. It certainly helps me. It makes me feel better. Spirituality, for many of us, praying or being a part of some church can really help you feel better. And my co-presenter today, Heather, and we were going to talk a little bit about art and writing and music, because we've found that that is one of the most helpful things for us, and for me in particular, it's helped me a lot in managing my stress. In my case, what I did is I found an opportunity to do a fundraiser for the legal services agency that I was working for. You know, using the right brain is really beneficial to balancing out all of that casework that's affecting the left brain. And I was an artist before I became an attorney. I was constantly into art classes in college and in high school, and it completely went away when I became an attorney. And not having that prevented me from having the escape from stress that art can provide. And so what I did was I tried to overlap being a lawyer and being an artist by offering a fundraiser and having this deadline where I had to produce something by a certain period of time to invite guests over to do some fundraising and sell the art for the legal services agency. So after I did that once, it was so wonderful to be able to do art again and to do it for my law firm that I made it an annual thing. And for many years I did it for the legal services agency that I worked for. And since then I've expanded to other nonprofits and actually done one with the Campaign for Southern Equality. So if you can try to bring your lives together, your hobbies and your legal careers together and have them overlap, it can bring you a lot of peace. Stress management and ethics. So this is the stuff the bar makes me put in my PowerPoint in order to get credit, but it's actually very important. One of the things that I think is helpful in managing my biggest fears, like getting so overwhelmed with the number of cases that I miss something, and they call me for malpractice, and there's some complaint made to the bar, and I get disbarred, and the world ends. Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is process that fear all the way through. See it all the way through. So what if a client does complain? Well, you would respond to that. You know, the bar would interview you. You know, it probably wouldn't be that huge of a deal because it happens all the time to lawyers. And let's say that they found that you really did commit malpractice. Well, your malpractice insurance would probably pick it up. Well, let's say it was really bad. What if you did get disbarred? Well, let's look at our safety nets that we have. Let's look at getting our license back. You know, it's not the end of the world if all of these things happened. You have to look past those fears and try to see past them. See what you would do and rationalize to yourself, okay, this is what I would do, and plan for those types of things. And somehow it takes the power away from those fears if you're able to imagine going all the way through them and coming out the other end and surviving it. It's also helpful to notice your reactions to client meetings. It's okay to be passionate about your client, but it's not okay to take their problems home with you. Realize that there are cases, instance when you can say no, or you can withdraw from stressful matters. If a client is insisting on pursuing a tactic that is repugnant to the attorney, the lawyer may withdraw from the representation. You know, if I had a dime for every client that says, I want you to be a bulldog, I want you to go in there, I want you to yell and fight for me. And these are, you know, clients that have been disempowered, and they deserve to have a strong advocate. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be a jerk or that you need to be abusive. And so, you know, what I usually do in those cases is I've responded to clients with, I have a style that works very well, trust me. You know, I'm gonna take care of you, I care very much about you, and we're gonna go into court, and you're gonna have your day in court, but you may not hear me yell. That's not my style, but my style works. Realize you can't control unreasonable clients. Notice when your feelings may conflict with your ethical duty to diligently represent a client. But also, see Rule 1.2A2, a lawyer does not violate the duty to abide by client's decisions relative to the objectives of the representation by avoiding offensive tactics. So, you can say no if they say, well, I want you to yell. I want you to cuss at them the way that they have at me. You don't have to agree to that. It does not mean that you're not zealously advocating for your client. And set reasonable boundaries. Your clients will benefit from having an attorney who is well-rested, happy, and healthy. Recognize when work or life is stressful at the moment and give yourself understanding and sympathy of your own struggles. And so now I'm going to turn things over to Heather, who is going to do a guided exercise with us, and we're going to have you all do some work, and I think that we're going to benefit from learning from each other today. So, Heather, come on up.
I'm taller than May. Can you hear me? Okay. So I have a solo law practice in Asheville, and I write fiction professionally, and I teach creative writing for the UNCA Great Smoky Writing Program, and I'm the mother of a 17-year-old girl, no drama there, and I have 2 aging parents who increasingly need attention, and I'm sure all of you out there are wearing just as many hats as I am. So when people like May call up and say, how do you do it? I usually say, badly, badly. I do it really badly. So I do it really badly, but I think it's important for all of us to remember that even if we can't be perfect in claiming a creative life, it's still important that we claim it. So I just wanted to share some things I've learned the hard way about how to go about doing that, so that you can save yourself some time in life. A lot of people ask me how I balance fiction writing and the practice of law. And I used to do it one way, and now I do it another. Before I had a child, the way I claimed my writing life was to compartmentalize, set aside my writing time. Nobody could bother me. That was my time, and I got my writing done that way. And then I had a child, and it all went to hell in a handbasket, because babies don't care if you've set aside time to do something without them. They get sick, and they need care, and you just want to be with them. So I spent a lot of frustrating years still trying to maintain those walls that I had set up, and then feeling just frustrated and resentful when one area of my life intruded on another. I never really felt like, another metaphor you could use, I'm a writer, we use metaphors, is like a juggling act. I always felt like I had 4 separate balls that I needed to keep in the air. One was my family life, one was my lawyer life, one was my writing life, and one was my spiritual life. And usually I would have at least 2 balls on the floor and could never seem to keep more than 2 in the air at the same time. And it was very frustrating. And then one July, some of you from Asheville remember Bell Share, which is no longer part of our Asheville life, but at a Bell Share party one year, I ran into an old friend who had gone back to divinity school as a second career and had gotten a pastorship at a teeny little church where he was the only staff member. And he said that his life had basically become his church life, and his personal life and his social life. Everything was all the same now. He was on call 24/7, and his friends were at the church, and his work and his recreation, it was all just kind of blending together, and he said he had never been happier in his life. He doesn't remember that conversation, but for me it really was life-changing, because I thought, I've been expending all this energy trying to keep the compartments separate what if I could use that energy to actually do the creative work that I wanted to do? So I made an intentional decision to try to start looking for opportunities to just let it be a big old mess and to let all the different parts of life blend together. I started in my law practice, representing, adding work to my law practice areas to help other writers and artists, instead of just keeping my writing life separate. I started teaching creative writing through my church. I stopped trying to keep my kid from being in the room when I was writing. I would have her come in and just train myself to work with a little busy person in the room. The reward of that has been that my daughter, who's 17 now, has grown up to be a fine writer in her own right. And I found that it just made me a whole lot happier and a whole lot less stressful to decompartmentalize. So I'd like to encourage you all, if you're like me and you're trying to keep it all separate and perfect, to just let it be sloppy and blend it all together, find ways to just make it all be one big stew, if you want to think about it that way. So the exercise that we're going to do is kind of aimed at thinking about that. I'll give you a couple more examples that I thought of before we get started on the exercise. One thing that I try to do with my writing is if something does happen in life, if there's a crisis of some kind that robs me of my writing time, then I try to co-opt it. It's sort of my revenge. One example is my dad recently broke his hip. So I had a lot of time waiting around in the rooms of a nursing home. So I could have pouted about that, but instead I had my writing notebook. I could write, I could take note of sensory details of that experience, and someday I may incorporate that into a piece of fiction. Another example from a few years ago when my daughter was in middle school, and this can't go out of this room or she'll die of mortification, but I was in the middle of a November, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the NaNoWriMo contest where people try to write a novel in 1 month. It's fun, you should do it sometime. But I was going great guns, got to mid-November, and my child came home with lice. And if you've ever had that experience, it can be very, very time consuming. And so I spent many, many hours that I could have been writing trying to eradicate lice. And my revenge for that was to put a scene in my novel where lice came home. So I lent some verisimilitude to my fiction and got something out of that experience. And kind of to that end, I want to share a quote from another writer. This is a quote by Katherine Paterson. She says, "I was writing, learning, and growing along with the children until eventually I was writing fiction worthy of publication. It might have happened sooner had I had a room of my own and fewer children, but somehow I doubt it. For as I look back on what I've written, I can see that the very persons who have taken away my time and space are those who have given me something to say." So I think that's a good statement of how we ought to look at entwining our creative and our work lives. So the writing exercise that we're going to do, I'm sorry, I got a little cut off. This is a quote from a gentleman who is on the faculty of the design school, I believe at Stanford. And the quote is, "People often confuse who they are with their possessions, their achievements, or their jobs." Do you know any lawyers who do that? The parsing out of the questions into 3 parts, this helps them to gain clarity. So we're going to think about that first, and then this exercise will take place in parts. So the first thing I want you to do, sorry, I'm okay. Does everybody have something to write with and to write on? So the first part you're gonna do individually, and the questions are, and I want you to write as many as you can possibly come up with in 5 minutes. Who am I in terms of what I have? And by that I mean I have a nice car, I have a law practice, you know, a spouse, a leadership position, a Nobel Prize, whatever that might be. So who am I in terms of what I have? Number 2, who am I in terms of what I do? I go to work every day, so I'm a lawyer, a teacher, a school volunteer, a caregiver, a single parent, whatever that might be. And then, who am I in terms of my being? And I really want you to spend some time on that. Your answers to the second question and the third question may overlap or they may not. You know, for some people, going and being a lawyer every day is just a job. For others, it's really who they are. It's really part of their identity as an advocate. So there may be overlap between questions 2 and 3. But who are you in terms of your being? And just some examples: advocate, activist, parent, teacher, daughter, musician, artist, golfer, runner, sober person, person of faith, caregiver, nurturer. If your gender identity or ethnicity is in this season of your life an important part of your being, then this is where you would put that.